Okay, hello everyone. So, been a while since I did a video for the playlist of the whistle stop tour of the openings. As I always say at the beginning of these ones, I'm not going to even try to go into any depth on these openings. I just want to do 2 or 3 moves in each of them. And then if there's one that takes your fancy particularly, you'll find just thousands of resources all over the internet to help you study them a bit more deeply. I don't have the knowledge of most of the openings to do it, in that much depth anyway. Leave that to the grandmasters and the international masters, but I can show you the first 2 or 3 moves of each, or first maybe 4 or 5 in some cases, to get you started. And what we're going to look at today is gambits. I'm talking now, I'm talking now about some of the more sort of romantic period gambits, some of the riskier ones that you can play. So I'm not really talking Queen's Gambit here because, although this is a gambit because you're giving up a pawn, it's not really one that black can hold particularly easily. So it's more of a temporary gambit. We're going to look more at some of the permanent ones. And we might as well start with the King's Gambit. And let's this start. So what's happening here is white is hoping that black will play pawn takes pawn, and then white will want to get developed super quickly, probably launch an attack towards the f7 square. We'll get castled. We'll have the rook on this file. It looks terribly impressive, doesn't it, with all the arrows? But of course, black gets some moves in between. And black can just play d6, can just ignore it. There's nothing wrong with that. But frequently, the best way to deal with a gambit is to take it and just play into it and play sensibly, and at some point just give the material back. So the most common thing is to take it. White can play bishop c4 here, and you get some slightly weird looking stuff. Probably d6, maybe d5 is okay. Looking at the analysis, the computer is liking d6. You're going to get knight f3, kick the queen, this sort of thing. But much more common is for white to play knight to f3. And now black has lots of options. The most accurate one is probably here, but you could play d5, d6, all the way around, bishop e7, whatever. But g5 is quite interesting, so we'll just have a quick look at that one. Bishop to c4 is okay. I mean, look, the computer's suggesting various other options, and there's bishop c4 has appeared as being the most likely one, because the King's Gambit, good arrow, the King's Gambit, you're normally looking to get the knight attacking there, possibly from g5. Okay. And you can have all sorts of fun with this. Black can do various things. Knight c6 is the computer's choice, but there's other options. What you should notice is that although black is a pawn up, the analysis is not showing -1. And what that tells you is that white is getting a bit of compensation for the pawn that they've sacrificed. So have a look, 2 pieces are developed, no black pieces are developed. So that's what you get in return for the pawn. Just an entertaining line, just because we're here. This one's quite good fun. Let's sacrifice an entire knight. Why not? And this time we've sacrificed an entire knight in return for huge pressure on the f file. The bishop's going through, the queen, the queen's pawn's going to go forward. This pawn's going to drop. White gets quite an initiative for a whole knight here. So just remember, on the board, black is currently plus 3 pawns up, and yet it's not -3. It's less than -1. So that tells you that white gets quite a lot of play for their knight in this. It's the Mad Muzio Gambit. But yeah, so King's Gambit, that is one possibility. There's hundreds of gambits, and I'm only going to sort of show a sprinkling of them here really quickly. Another one against e5 you can play here, which is the center game, which is perfectly reasonable, as you can see. Pawn takes pawn, fine. White can develop normally with knight f3 and just win the pawn back, no problem. Or we can go a bit crazy, and we can have the Danish Gambit. If black wants to take it, they can. They don't have to. The best move there is probably just to play d5 and just ignore the extra pawn and get developed. But you can be greedy. And now white has 2 options. We can develop the knight. And for the price of a pawn, you will see that the bishops are ready to go. The knight's ready to go will often go after the f-pawn in games that I've seen. The queen is ready to come out wherever she needs to come out to. White can get castled. So basically white has sacrificed a pawn to gain time. And again, you can see this compensation because it doesn't say -1. It says -0.43. So the computer thinks that white's got a really good position in return for the pawn. Entertaining alternative, if white feels so inclined. Sacrifice the second pawn, why not? Let's be 2 pawns behind. But now look at this lead in development. Okay, so this is still the Danish Gambit. And we're now -2, except that we're not. Okay, so the computer is admitting, yeah, black is, look at it. Instead of it being -2, because black's 2 pawns ahead, it's only 0.36. So you get some idea of the power of this lead in development. So it's not a guaranteed win by any means, but very, very dangerous opening. Let's go back to the beginning. Another one that you will come across that's very good, and the YouTube International Master Gotham Chess does this one brilliantly, is something called the Vienna Gambit. And the normal Vienna game is just to develop. Nothing wrong with that. It's quite solid, quite classical, just put pieces out. But if black does this move, then you have a gambit, and you have this, the Vienna Gambit. The best thing for black to do is not to take it, is actually to counter-attack in the center. But more often than not, beginner level, you're going to find that they grab the pawn, and then after e5, where are you going to put your knight? You can't put it there or there because the white knight takes. Here or here, the queen takes. If you go back to g8, it looks pretty awful. If you try to do this to pin the pawn, you can see for yourself what the computer thinks of that, because you'll just have queen at e2, possibly d4 instead, and eventually the knight's got to move anyway. So that's then a really nice position for white. Black won't be able to hold this extra pawn anyway. It's too far away from its own forces. So there's the Vienna Gambit. Let's have a pet one of mine that I really quite like, especially in Bullet and Blitz. And it's this one, known as the Blackmar-Diemar Gambit. Best thing for black to do really is either to take it or just play e6 and turn it into the French defense. But you can take it, and then there's options for white. You can play knight to c3 and attack the pawn slowly, or you can immediately go straight for f3. But let's say that the main line's normally to do the knight move first. Black will pretend that they're going to defend the pawn. F3 from white, and now what happens? Well, he takes f3 usually will come. And then white has choices. You can play the super risky queen takes f3 and try and get that bishop out and put your rook on d1. But it's not quite enough, as you can see from the analysis. But knight takes f3. Okay. And once again, it's not -1. Even though black is a pawn ahead, it's not -1 because white's got a compensation with the pieces coming out quickly. So here we go. This bishop's going to come out. This is going to come out. The queen's going to go somewhere, possibly d2, possibly d3. You might even castle long and get your rook here. The plan will play itself. These pawns can be thrown at the enemy king if it castles this side. And yet, whilst all those arrows look really impressive, if black defends accurately, black's just a pawn up. So that's the point of a gambit. It's all out attack for the price of a pawn. So all out attack, quick development for the price of a pawn or two. So there's a few that you can play as white. Let's quickly do the Wing Gambit as well. So one for the Sicilian defense. Oh, I haven't done the Morra Gambit in the Sicilian. Okay, so the Morra Gambit in the Sicilian, very similar to the Danish that we saw. You can now either play knight takes c3, and you remember it looks very similar to the Danish. It's just that these two pawns are swapped. So you've got the same thing. You've given up a pawn for a lead in development, for quick, easy development. Your bishops are going to come out. You might play f4, knight f3, get castled in return for a pawn. And also a bit like with the Danish Gambit, if you really feel the need, you can attempt to sacrifice another one. Now, again, you're 2 pawns down, but you're not really, because it's not -2. So the computer's saying you've got quite a bit of compensation in the shape of these bishops and the easy development. These gambits will never work against a strong computer as well, by the way, because you'll just get out-calculated. But against a human being, under this kind of pressure, you will often find that they'll make mistakes. So, okay, I think that's the ones that I'd listed as white. There's, again, there's loads more, but I just wanted to do a flavour. So that's absolutely fine. Did I do the Wing Gambit? No, I didn't do the Wing Gambit. Let's do that. I've got a little checklist next to me. So the Wing Gambit and the Sicilian, you can either do this straight away, or some players prefer to do it after knight f3 so that d6 has been played. And what will happen? Well, b4. And the idea is simply to deflect this pawn away from the center of the board. So usual thing, quick development and deflect the opponent from the center of the board. Now, black doesn't have to take here, but they usually do. And what will happen is d4. So look at the control of the center for white. This pawn you'll reclaim whenever you want because you've got 3 pieces attacking it. So there's no rush to take it back. And you might get something that looks a bit like this. I mean, let's just play some moves. Maybe black will want to do something with this bishop. So we might fianchetto, castles, bishop g7, possibly c3. That's going here, possibly knight takes. What's the computer's looking at all sorts of options. h3 is interesting. I hadn't thought of that. But yeah, various things you can do. And so you end up as white, 1 pawn down, but again, with this lovely center and the lovely lead in development. So interesting stuff. Playing gambits as black is doable, of course, but because you're a move behind, it can be a little bit riskier. But we'll just have a little look at a couple of possibilities. Let's see. So one that you might come across here is this. Perfectly normal stuff so far. Bishop b5. It looks like the Ruy Lopez, and then black can whip out that move, which is known. It's calling it the Jaenisch Gambit there. I always thought it was called the Schliemann, but maybe it's just got 2 names. Whatever, it's fine. And of course, it's the usual thing. So black wants to distract the white pawn from the center of the board. And let's actually, you can see from the computer analysis, pawn takes pawn isn't the best, but let's see what sort of things might happen. So after the capture, you can play e4. Okay, kick the knight away. It's a bit like one that we saw earlier. You might have queen e2. Now you can't play pawn takes knight because of the pin. So you'll have queen e7. You might get bishop takes c6, possibly, but if white plays really passively and just puts the knight back, all kinds of things can happen here. Knight to d4 looks really, really good. Knight to f6 looks really, really good. I mean, look at the analysis. Right? White is supposed to be a pawn up here, and yet everything is -1 in black's favor. So the Schliemann Gambit can be pretty scary if you don't know what you're doing. If you're playing bullet and blitz, you could try the Latvian Gambit, which is the Schliemann, but just 1 move earlier. And this isn't as good. Objectively, it's not as good, as you can see from the analysis. But if you know what you're doing with it and you run up against a white opponent that doesn't know what they're doing with it, you'll get some really, really nice positions. You'll frequently find a white opponent at beginner level will just panic and will just play that. And that's great news, because you're just equalizing really, really quickly in any number of ways. d6 is okay. You can play knight c6. You can play pawn takes pawn, knight f6, fine. But the most critical lines, white will have the advantage if they know what they're doing. So we'll just play things like this. The knight is going to have to retreat. You're probably going to play pawn takes pawn, probably going to have knight to c3, queen to g6 is next, and then various moves. I think f3 from memory is the one that seems to give white the advantage. But as I say, if white doesn't know what they're doing with the Latvian, they will get into some trouble. What else? We can play one as well with the D pawn. So we've got that and that and that. And now black can try the Budapest Gambit, which again is perfectly okay. You'll probably find in beginner level chess that white might panic a bit and will just play a passive move like that, in which case we're happy as black because we've equalized. As you can see, you can play bishop b4 check and it's suddenly tiny advantage black. But if they don't, if they play here, then knight to g4, and you will find that white can't hold this pawn. There's simply no way to hold it. Whatever you do as white, and there's various moves that are okay, you won't be able to hold this pawn. You'll get things like either bishop to c4, aiming at that. Some lines, the bishop will go here with check. Sometimes it will be knight here, queen here. There's just no way to hold it. So it's quite safe for black. It's a cheeky gambit, really, in the sense as a white can't hold on to it. And as you see, against best play, white gets a slight advantage from the opening. Well, white should get a slight advantage from the opening. They move first. What I would say with this one is if white doesn't handle it right, they will get into a pickle, because you can end up with the bishop here pointing at this square and just nasty things can happen. So that will be the Budapest Gambit. Okay, as I say, there's an awful lot of gambits that are available. And some of them are like really deep into the openings, like sort of 10 or 12 moves deep. The main thing is that you just get the idea that sometimes you have an opening where you'll sacrifice a pawn, maybe 2 pawns. And the idea is that you really generate a quick attack by development, get your pieces out, get a big center, and just go straight for the opponent. If someone plays a gambit against you, you can usually accept it and then just play sensible developing moves, be ready to give the material back at some point, and all will be well. Just don't panic when someone plays a gambit against you. None of them are actually immediately winning if you handle them correctly. Okay, so that's the whistle-stop tour of some of the gambits. Hopefully that was quite interesting, and we'll be back with a bit more next time. I think the next time I'll cover some of the system openings, so ones that you can play without really doing much memorization. Sounds good to me. See you later.